welcome. Thank you for having me again. I apologize in advance. I think this is a great topic. I love this topic. But it's a little long, and it's kind of like a book review, all right? So if it seems a little dry, just give me the look like you're getting bored, and I'll try to tell a joke or something. All right? I'll do my best not to let it go that way. But it's a great topic. If you're into Spiritism, for a long time, it's nice to review the history, because there was stuff I learned reading this book and preparing that I had either forgotten or didn't know. If you're new to Spiritism, it's kind of interesting as well, right? Because there's stuff in here that you probably definitely haven't heard. But this is actually a book. It was written by Allan Kardec. It was published for the first time in 1862. I think I have a copy of the cover. Everybody's familiar with these books, right? We talk about these a lot, or if you come to our study groups on Tuesdays, or if you do the gospel at home, you've got some of these, if not all of them. A lot of material, a lot of books, huge books. I've had the pleasure of reading 4 of these cover to cover, either in a study group or on my own at home. The only one I haven't done cover to cover yet is Heaven and Hell. I do love reading pieces of that, but I'd like to start a study group at some point on Tuesday where we do Heaven and Hell as a group. But those are the foundation, the basis, the books originally published that detailed the doctrine, if you will, called Spiritism. All right? It didn't create Spiritism, mind you. All right? Spiritism, as we learned, been around for a while, but first documented, if you will, and detailed it in an orderly fashion. But this is the book we're talking about tonight, and this book basically was published by Kardec in an effort to popularize Spiritism, knowing that people, right, wouldn't necessarily pick up the Spirits book, right, and read it from cover to cover, because it's a lot of material, and somebody that's looking for an overview might find it dry, right? He published this book so that he could give people an easier format, smaller bites, an overview without too much, right? To answer their questions and to pique their interest so that they would learn more. And this wasn't the only book like this. Kardec and others, books have been written, small books about individual topics. Some of those are still in print, like this one. Many of them are not. But this book is still there. I'm sure we have some on the shelf in our bookstore, maybe even in our library here. But basically, it reviews the history and the basic principles. So how many of you knew that modern Spiritism started in the United States? Yeah? I think I knew that, but I felt like I didn't, so this reminded me. Remember the Fox Sisters? Anybody ever hear of the Fox Sisters? That's a play that we did here many years ago. My kids were, tiny when we did that. But basically, Mr. Fox. I was Mr. Fox, that's right. I wore a top hat, and I had a velvet jacket on, I think. Wow, time flies, yeah? So this phenomena in 1848 was rare. It was interesting. It was scary. It was explainable. It was unexplainable. It was all the rage at some point, right? But basically, what was happening is you'd be sitting someplace, right, and you'd hear noises or raps, or your table would suddenly move, right? There was no explanation, right? How could that happen, right? So this became more frequent and remarkable, and gained a following where there were actually shows. People charged admission to come see this, obviously leading to the charlatan effect and people doubting it. But when this thing happened, right, then either the movement or the rapping, there was typically a medium present. And back then, mediums had a probably different meaning than they do today, right? It's not as mainstream or as acceptable. But as these things were happening, there was a desire to try to figure out what was causing it. The table was the most common, probably because we all sit around tables, right? They're everywhere, so that was the easiest thing for a spirit to move. But over time, it became pretty obvious that this wasn't just a physical phenomena, like boiling water or watching a candle burn. It wasn't just physical. There was some intelligence behind it, and if there was an intelligent cause, right, or an intelligent movement, then there must be some intelligent origin, right? Because intelligent outcomes have an intelligent basis or conclusion. So it was concluded that there was definitely an intelligence behind this. So they tried to figure out where this was coming from, right? What was the nature of this intelligence? So obviously, just like me, well, I shouldn't say like me, I'm more of an open-minded skeptic, but you show me something new, I want to believe, but I'm skeptical to a degree, right? I want to see the proof. And that's what happened here. Many people speculated that the medium contributed. They looked for ropes, they looked for some type of hidden way to move the table or to knock on the table.
Like magicians.
Like magicians, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But they couldn't find any of that. And it was obvious that it was the things that were discussed, because at some point, in addition to just moving things or wrapping, they answered questions, right, with a code and what have you. So it was obvious that the mediums that were doing this, sometimes young children, sometimes people that had no, I mean, they didn't have an education, perhaps. They were talking about advanced topics. That there's no way these people had studied that. They hadn't learned that. So it was contradictory to their level of education or their known ideas and will. So there had to be an invisible being as the cause, right? So they developed codes, and initially simple things like yes and no. One knock for no, two knocks for yes, a number of knocks for letters, for numbers, where eventually these tables would essentially talk, right? You could ask a question to the table, and an answer would be spelled out, right? Makes me think of a Ouija board. You remember those when you were a kid? Anybody else used to get scared playing Ouija? I couldn't sleep for days, right? It was weird. Obviously, this was the start of this communication, right? So when the questions were asked about the nature, right? So, and remember, this didn't just happen in upstate New York, right? It started there, but this obviously spread to other places. So when people investigated to try to get answers, the common answer from all of these different spirits, right, these different places, they explained, look, we're spirits, and they describe what that is. You know, we lived on Earth, or we lived in another world, but here we are now. You can't see us, but we're here. We can answer your questions. And this was independently witnessed around the world. It spread from the U.S. into France and Europe. And as I said, it had somewhat of a fad and entertainment effect, like a magician, as Valdo explained. Tickets were sold, crowds and what have you, right, in different areas. And then to the very not commercialized realm of this, where Kardec, right, gathered lots of information. Is how these books were originally put together, not knowledge from his head per se, but from consistency, from questions asked of spirits that were accumulated or gathered from mediums from around the world. So from the fad and the magician type environment, all the way to the development or the production of wonderful books, right? All from spirits from the other side. And it developed, right, from simple knocks to the use of a planchette, to mediums actually writing things, all different types of forms of this. But it grew and grew until it gets to what we're going to talk about here more so, right? Better communication, right? The better we were able to communicate and the more detailed answers we could get, it led to better questions, right? So what were spirits? What role do they serve, right? Why are they here? Why are they even talking to us, right? What's the significance of all this? And the answers that we were given, right, for this is that, hey, we're no different than you guys, except we don't have a body, right? We're dead, right? But we're spirits. The body was nothing, right? It's just an envelope. But we are the actual souls of those who used to live on Earth on other worlds. And after we died, we traveled space, and some of us are your relatives, right? Some of us proved to us their previous lives. Like remember the young boy maybe a decade ago, the World War II pilot? You guys remember that movie? I think it was on 60 Minutes as well. Anyways, that was common, right? Spirits that could give an accounting of their previous life that could be verified and proven based on historical facts. So they were able to prove at that time, and still today, that they're right here with us, observing us, assisting us, there to help, share their stories. And this developed over the last couple hundred years extensively. right? So what spirits did at this time, throughout those areas, is they demonstrated that they were real beings, possessing individuality and determined form, right? Not to the visual eye, to the visible eye, per se, but they were definitely, there was a determined form and they had individuality. And they taught us, they shared with us the nature, if you will, the three essential things of human beings that we're comprised of, right? Because we all know about the flesh and the bone, right? And for many of us, definitely in previous generations, maybe just as much in this lifetime for a lot of us, until we learn more, this was everything, right? The physical body, right? You run out, if your blood pressure gets to 0, you're dead, right? And it's over, right? Nothing happens, right? But we know now that these three essential things that we have, right? The soul or the spirit, that's the intelligent principle in which thought, will, and moral sense reside. That's forever, right? It doesn't die. It's immortal. The body, of course, we know all about. They describe it as a coarse, heavy material envelope which enables the spirit to relate to the outer world. It's going to perish. It's going to end one day. And then the perispirit is a light fluidic envelope that serves as a connection between the spirit and the body. So those three things are essential. 2 of them are immortal, right? The one in the middle is just a vehicle to help us interact in this life. Make sense? Yeah, cool. So they also taught us that death, right, is nothing more than that outer envelope, right? Is done. It can't do anything else. It's lost its function. It collapses, and the spirit rids itself of the body, like peeling an orange. Yeah, right. The rind is gone. Or when a tree loses its bark, right, it sheds its old, worn-out garment. Death, therefore, is nothing other than the destruction of the coarse envelope. Only the body dies, not the spirit. So for the first, probably 2 decades of my life, at least until I was 15, 16 years old, I was terrified of death, right? I lost my grandfather at a really young age, and I was terrified putting my head on the pillow like I wasn't going to wake up, like him. So for a long time, none of this would have made any sense to me. When the body died, that was it. And the other side of that is that they talk about heaven and hell, right? I was taught that as a kid. I couldn't relate to that either because that didn't make logical sense. So I was kind of stuck, scared to die, and I couldn't believe either reality that could happen from what I was taught. So upon death of the body, the spirit, what this book tells us, right, what we learn, is it's kind of like a prisoner being released from jail, right? When we're in physical form, when we're in the body, we're tied, right? The only time the spirit's free is when you go to sleep, and it can do what it wants, right? Because the spirit doesn't sleep. But when the body dies, the physical body is gone, the perispirit's retained, and it's simply ethereal and vaporous, right? So it's what they call imponderable, sort of like a body, right? And it can take form and shape, but it's vaporous. It's kind of like steam, right? That forms over a surface. So you can kind of see the form. It can be shaped, but it's typically invisible, but made visible to us, much like steam, right? When it condenses, like they describe. Hence, that perispirit is what's making the knocks or the raps, right? Or manipulating matter. It is what was doing that phenomena, not the medium and not just some invisible, that has a form, it has shape. They go on to explain that spirits can do lots of things, right? They can express thought, right? Like the raps or the movements of the table. They can write things, drawing, there's music. Believe it or not, spirits that present music, playing melodies, seeing and hearing, different mediums that can interpret things from spirits, that can receive messages or channel through these different these different modalities, if you will. So as we come to learn in a Spiritist Center, a lot of us come to a Spiritist Center for the first time during a time of crisis. Yeah, we've lost someone, life isn't going well, we're caught up in stuff that we don't understand. And then we learn as we study, right, that a lot of that is connected to the way we're living, or the way we've lived, and we draw energy to us. So there's good and bad spirits, right? There's nothing more than the souls that have gone on before us. Just because my body dies does not mean my soul or my spirit becomes perfect. Right? Wherever I am in my moral development now, or when I pass, right, my body dies, is where I am, right? I don't go backwards, I don't jump ahead, I don't skip go and collect $200, right? Like in Monopoly, right? It is what it is. I've reached this level of development, this is where I stop. So, as I'm living, attracting energy to me, right? The spirits that are hanging out with me, right? The ones that came in with me from my ride from work, right? The ones that joined me on my journey because of whatever I was listening to or thinking, right? That's what I've attracted to me. And we've all done that tonight. We've all brought spirits with us tonight. And hopefully the ones that aren't as evolved grow as a result of being here just like us. And the ones that are positive, stay positive and stay with us, yeah? Because we're not going to suddenly be perfect spirits. There's going to be different degrees of maliciousness, right? As well as wisdom and positive energy and ignorance. And it's really what we draw to ourselves. So, spirits of all degree can communicate with us. How many of you feel like sometimes you get good messages and other times you get not so good messages? Happens, right? Remember that cartoon? You probably remember, Tom, right? The devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And wanting to listen to one over the other sometimes. So spirits of all degrees will communicate with us, and they're with us, right? They're around us. And what's beautiful about this is we have free will, right? To follow the intuition of our choice, of our choosing. So we can radiate peace and love, and we can surround ourselves with that magnet of positive energy, good spirits, and be driven and suggested good outcomes from excellent energy, or we can gravitate towards negativity, right, and be influenced by negative energy. It's totally up to us what we choose, and that's the beauty of this. So the teachings of the higher order spirits, right, concerning all the different subjects, right? Who's God? What's life all about? What happens when I die? Where did I come from? What's the creation of Earth? You know, all these different things that we probably ask ourselves. Were compiled in those 5 books that I showed you, and it was coined Spiritism. Allan Kardec, I believe, invented the word Spiritism, right? It's attributed to him, and all Spiritism is, right? And remember, Kardec didn't invent Spiritism, right? He wrote those early books with the assistance of elevated spirits from around the globe with a lot of different mediums, not just 1 or 2, took the consistencies of these messages and compiled them, didn't invent Spiritism. And Spiritism existed long before 1862, right? The concepts, if you will, even though he coined the phrase. But Spiritism is simply founded on the existence, the manifestations, and the teachings of spirits. In other words, spirits exist, right? We believe that. With that existence comes their ability to manifest and communicate with us and teach us, right? And it's set forth in the first 5 books, right, that Kardec wrote way back when, right? These books right here that we've already talked about. So let's talk about those books just a little bit. The Spirits book, everybody's heard of that? Probably, right? It covers, think about the first 3 books. I like to call it a 3-legged stool, right? It's hard to sit on a 1-legged stool or a 2-legged stool, right? But 3 legs, you got balance, right? The first leg of this stool, the philosophical aspect, right? There's, 1,019 questions, I think, depending on which version you pick up, I guess. Who is God? What happens when I die? What are spirits? Whenever I don't know the answer, I ask Valdo, because he's studied longer than me. All right? But the point is, it covers the philosophy, right? Those big questions, those life and death kind of questions, and those important things. And then the medium's book, right? The second leg of this stool, we'll call it. That's the science of Spiritism, right? And it's not a physical science in the sense of like biology or chemistry, which is kind of complicated, right? That's what made it hard to necessarily prove this, right? It's not black and white, like chemistry or physics and what have you. But the mediumship is the science in Spiritism. It's where we do the experimentation, it's where we do the work, it's where we get direction and assistance. It's truly the work piece of Spiritism, or the science. Questions like this, right? Who is a medium? How do I practice mediumship? What is obsession? How do we assist others via mediumship? All these questions are answered. And that book is pretty big. And I forget, was it Casey, who is a North American medium from the last century? He's quoted as saying, I believe it's him, I may be somebody else, but I'm pretty sure it was Casey, but he's quoted as saying is that the Medium's book that was written by Kardec, it was the most comprehensive and detailed book on how to practice mediumship published at the time. Right? Probably still is to this day. Right? It's very detailed. Everything from how a meeting should be run, the do's and the don'ts, the materials, instructions for the counselors, instructions for the mediums, instructions for the director. Very, very thorough. And our class here at the center is a 3-year class to study this book and to complete your training as a medium. Very, very thorough. And a lot of times people will come to the center for the first time because of this, right? They hear about Spiritism, they read about how we communicate with the dead, right, with spirits, and they come here for the phenomena. And I think a lot of times we'll see people for a while, and then they realize we're not doing seances or playing Ouija, and they don't come back regularly, right? We really hear about studying and about the work and about growing morally. This is one piece of it, and it's very real, it's very active here, but it's not, that work's not necessarily done in this public forum, if you will. And then the gospel according to Spiritism, that's the last leg, and frankly, I probably shouldn't assign importance or significance. Just for me personally, this is the best, right? The best book, my favorite book. Why? Maybe because I grew up Catholic, I grew up studying the Bible. Maybe I can relate to it, or I don't know what it is, but all I can say is when I read the gospel, and I do that every morning, usually with my wife, we just open it randomly. What the gospel according to Spiritism does is it takes verses from the Bible, right, the New Testament, and it shares the interpretation at the time, right, the parable, if you will, or whatever that it is, and it gives an interpretation from spirits, elevated spirits, on how that applies, right, in a spiritist perspective. It's awesome, and it's very good reading. And then heaven and hell, we won't spend a lot of time on. If you pick up heaven and hell, it's basically stories from spirits that are sharing their existence, the lessons that they learned, the things they did wrong, what they'd fix. And then Genesis is a spiritist perspective on the actual book of Genesis. The takeaway here is all of these books are, a couple hundred years old at most, right? Was it 1859?
1857.
See, I told you he knew more than me. 1857 was a spirits book, right? But that wasn't the start of the knowledge. That was simply the codification, putting it on paper and sharing it with the world. Kind of like Moses brought the 10 Commandments, right? Christ brought the good news, right? Spiritism, in a sense, would be that third revelation, right? Now the world was ready to believe in spirits. It was ready to understand the immortality of the soul, and it was able to take some of the lessons we taught or learned from Christ, I should say, and put them into a perspective that included that science, if you will, and that philosophy. But it's nothing new, right? The Bible's full of manifestations. There's a lot of mention of what sounds like spirits in the Bible. India, Egypt, Greece, right? A lot of those philosophical teachings from those different eras are full. I've been listening to a lot of, there's an audio book called Brilliant, Almost Brilliant, a guy named Larry Brilliant. He's the physician that helped eradicate smallpox in India. And he's a smart guy, obviously, but also he was a hippie in the 60s, right? And not from the drug perspective, perhaps, but from that Eastern movement. And it details a lot of stuff that we study in Spiritism. I was amazed listening to this book, the time he spent in India, in Hindu and Buddha and different things, and how there's so much of what we study, right, in these other religions. So we didn't invent this stuff. It's been around for a long time. So what is recent, though, is the logical explanation of the phenomena. Prior to Spiritism, witches were burned at the stake, yeah? Mediums were arrested, killed. Disciples were hung or crucified, right? So in recent times, as a result of not necessarily Spiritism, but the world's acceptance of the concept, right? It's not so far out to believe in this stuff. Look at movies, look at TV, look at, there's many popular shows that are focused on mediumship now. There's lots of acceptance. There was a big article in, I think, Life or Time not too long ago about God and about mediums. It is not so out there anymore. It's not so weird anymore. I'm amazed at the people that I talk to in everyday life, in work. There's not such a weird reaction anymore when somebody asks me what I believe and I tell them, right? There's more acceptance of all this stuff. And thanks to Kardec and the spirits that assisted him, there's now a body of knowledge and a doctrine that has many applications. It's subject to change, right? One of the things Kardec taught us early on, he says, look, if science ever disagrees with this stuff that we've written down, don't stay with me. Stay with science, right? If science proves this wrong, go with science. So there's no edicts, there's no doctrine in the sense that it's my way or the highway, right? And we've already discussed this, right? We now know that the whole world's in a position to be assisted, right? Spirits are real. Mediums exist to assist with sharing that knowledge, and we are able to practice it more and more. It doesn't have to be hidden, right? Or not talked about. So what did Spiritism come to do? And what Kardec explained in this book was it simply came to confirm new evidence, right? Not new knowledge. The knowledge had existed. It was always there. But new evidence, right? The use of mediumship to demonstrate truths that for so long had been badly misunderstood. And they reiterate that Spiritism doesn't teach anything new. It just brings a different perspective to something old that the world's ready to hear and grow from. All right, just 2 more hours. I'm going to get there. So, they reiterate here, they go on to explain further, that Spiritism simply explains the existence of the soul. I like how they say merely explains. It's a big concept, the existence of the soul, I think. I couldn't get a straight answer of the existence of the soul from the nuns I went to Sunday school with, right? But when you read the Spirit's book, there's some pretty good explanations about what the soul is. Furthermore, right, there's a lot of detail about the survival after the body has died, how my spirit, your spirit, retains its individuality after death, and how it's immortal, how this life is not my first, and it's certainly not going to be my last, right? And then obviously the punishments and rewards reserved for it in the future. Because if you were like me, some guy with a pitchfork with a bunch of fire didn't make any sense to me. Scared the heck out of me, but it didn't make any sense to me. And pearly gates and angels, that vision that you learn, that just seemed like, I'm just going to sit there and be like relaxed. I should keep working, shouldn't I? Right? So it just didn't jive with me. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me it didn't work. And that's basically what Spiritism has shared with me, and I think shares with others. It basically takes long-time knowledge, concepts that we've kind of touched on in whatever religion we may have been born into or studied, and it kind of brings us answers that have rational logic to it. It's not just, this is this because they told us this, right? There's great explanations in the Spirit's book that make sense from a science perspective and from a rational perspective. It simply provides answers, and it explains to me the fairness of life. How many of you ever said that life isn't fair? right? Ever felt like you were a victim of the world, like they were out to get you? I know I've been there in the past. But Spiritism, and specifically the immortality of the spirit, of the soul, and the law of reincarnation makes life extremely fair, right? It explains to me clearly that life is a sequence, a series of cause and effect. Everything that's happening to me in this life is a direct result of choices I made in previous lives, or didn't make, right? Not making a choice can be just as bad as making a bad choice, right? So everything that's happening to me in this life, I have the free will how I'm going to react to it. And the choices I make determine things that come later. So I'm living the fruit of what I sowed, right, in previous lives. The actions I took, the things I did or didn't do, are now, I'm atoning for that in so many ways. Not just me, all of us. There is no lack of fairness, right? The world is just. God is just. I'm not favored more than you. You're not favored more than me. And the reason that we can all be so similar, yet in so many different places on this journey, is because of that. All created the same, right? Simple and lacking knowledge in our first life, and evolving and growing through multiple lives, which explains why we're all here in different stages, but yet going through the same struggle, or the same opportunities, if you will. So Spiritism, they tell us, goes on to explain the cause behind our suffering in this world and the means of mitigating it. You think suffering's bad? When you hear the word suffer, does that make you think negative connotations? No, it did me for a long time. Now,
It reminds you of pain.
it does remind you of pain.
It's not a cool thing to have.
It's not a cool thing to have, no. But suffering is where we grow, yeah? You really know where you are and who you are when things are the toughest, yeah? And you have the most room for growth at suffering. There's a guy that I listen to a lot that had a stroke, and he actually explained how he thanks God every day for his stroke. How many of us thank God for our disease? How many of us thank God for our suffering? Because through our suffering, we truly have the chance of growth. And that's why that second line there, the means of mitigating it, right? How do I mitigate suffering? How can you mitigate suffering? Live better, yeah? We were suffering more or less badly because of the choices we made. If we make better choices, we mitigate the duration of that suffering. The better I can live in this life, the less suffering to come later, is how I look at it. And the way to do this, they tell us, is reduce our ties to materialism as we become convinced of the grandeur and importance of future existences, which is eternal. So as we rationally buy into this concept, right, that the way Christ lived, right, the way he walked the earth, the example he gave us in his life, teaching us how to live, right, loving our enemies, loving others, treating others like we want to be treated, not retaliating, not seeking revenge, right, turning the other cheek. The more we can live like that and follow the light, right, the less tied we're going to be to ego, to pride, to all those things that lead us away from living right. And essentially, Spiritism softens the bitterness of life's sorrow. It calms the soul's desperation and agitation. It renders happiness to those who embrace it. If you can truly wake up each morning and thank God for your struggle, right? Thank God for the opportunity to work through it, and believe that and have faith that everything is the way it's supposed to be because of choices you made. And this new day is an opportunity to correct bad choices in the past. You will mitigate your suffering. But it's hard, yeah? The struggle is real, as they say. And it's hard sometimes to believe all that. Or you can believe it, but it's still hard to go through it. So religiously speaking, is Spiritism a religion, is what they're talking about here. It's definitely based on fundamental truths of all religions. I'm convinced every religion, including Spiritism, is only as right or correct as the ability of the knowledge that we have right now. There are things we don't know. And there are things that I'm talking about right now that could very well be wrong to some degree, or to my understanding. Just like my friend who's a Seventh-day Adventist, just like my other buddy who's a Muslim, just like my other buddy who's a Sikh, right? My other friend who's a Southern Baptist. I'm convinced we're all going to meet down the road and we're going to compare notes. Man, you were right about this, and man, oh boy, did I get that one wrong, you know, that kind of stuff, right? I'm convinced that there's just one truth, right, with thousands of interpretations. So religiously speaking, right, Spiritism is very much like all these other truths from religion. One God, the soul, the immortality of that soul, future rewards and punishments. But in Spiritism, there's no sect or denomination. You can walk in the door a Jew, listen to our stuff, and walk out a Jew, and no one's going to try to convert you. You can come in as an atheist and listen to these universal truths and apply some of those moral lessons to your life. No one's going to fault you or judge you for being an atheist, or try to convince you got to change your ways. And I love that. That's one of my great loves of Spiritism. So many things, right? There's no conversion. There's no rituals. There's no right or wrong. There just is. Right? These are universal truths. Take them or leave them. We're here non-judging. Right? Don't have to change. Don't have to stop believing in what you already believe. And there's very few religions in the world, right, or philosophies that take that approach. So morally speaking, right, we talked about religion. That's one leg. Right? This other leg, this moral leg, and this floored me. And I'd like to find the original version in Portuguese. So maybe you have a copy. I don't know. I've always said Spiritists are Christian, right? And I still believe that, right? But the wording in this book said essentially Christian, right? Why? Because we don't necessarily believe in that version of Christianity that says all you have to do is be baptized, or all you have to do is accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, and you get a pass, right? We believe in work, right? We believe that you got to work to progress morally. But we're essentially Christian according to this book, or we're Christian according to this book, because our teachings are 100% based on Christ, right? The way he lived, the lessons he taught. He is the most elevated spirit to ever walk the earth. And our belief is this purity is attainable, right, for all of us as we live multiple lives and as we grow. But it's not a pass. You don't just say, I believe, and everything's great, right? You got to work, you got to atone, and there's a lot of work involved. Does that make sense? Did I scare anybody yet? Oh, phew, usually half the room leaves when no, I'm just kidding. Never happens. So where do we go from here, right? The beauty also for me here with Spiritism is you've never seen us do anything ritualistic, right? We don't have uniforms, we don't wear certain hats, we don't make certain symbols. I wish we sang a little bit more. Sometimes music would be nice, but we don't do any of that stuff because there's no rituals, right? It prescribes none, there's no dogmas. Kardec himself told us, if science disagrees with us, go with science. Don't listen to this just because I wrote it 200 years ago and it made sense then. If science says this stuff is wrong, then we missed the mark, right? Hasn't happened, but it could, right? But we're definitely not a religion per se. We don't have any priests or churches. We don't charge for anything, right? We don't pass a hat. We don't ask very often for donation. Sometimes the Reds do, and we're a couple days late, and we say, hey, could you guys help out, right? But you don't see us do that very often. We don't impose our beliefs on anyone, and we're really here just to help, like Christ helped, right? You show up here and you need something, we're going to try to help you. We're not going to ask you to do anything in return. And if you believe a different way, don't stop believing that. We're not here to convert your thought process. So, it's definitely true, though, right, that Spiritism doesn't believe in eternal punishment. There is no eternal damnation. There is no eternal bliss. Ultimately, the destiny for each of us as a spirit is to reach that Christ-like perfection, to become a pure spirit. We're all going to get there. But it's dictated by the way we live, by the choices we make, the things we do or don't do. And some of us may get there faster than others. Some of us may suffer less than others. But we definitely don't believe in that physical place of heaven or hell. But the beliefs of this are not imposed on anyone. It simply is a place that exists, a belief system that exists based on universal truth that I'm convinced that My personal story is I went everywhere looking for where I fit in, right? You name the religion or the cult, and I probably went there, right? I shouldn't say that. I didn't go to a lot of them, but I went to a lot of them, but I didn't go to all of them. My point is, I wound up in some situations where it's like, what am I doing here? This makes no sense, right? Spiritism, from the first book I ever read, just made sense, and it gave me a place to come back to faith, right? So a place I could practice with like-minded people, a place where I could grow. And it was logical, it was spiritual, it just made sense, and it helped me. And I think that happens to a lot of people that wind up here. It's different, but it's not different. It's just the next step, with no judgment and no force to change it all if you don't want to. So, to recap, all right, this book ties everything up that spirits are nothing but souls. And they tell us that one cannot deny the existence of spirits without denying the existence of the soul. By believing in souls or spirits, the question is reduced to its simplest expression is, can the souls of those who have died communicate with the living? The answer is yes. All right? Is that comforting to all of you? Or does it scare you? Most of you in this room probably find it comforting, right? Because it's nothing new, right? A lot of people find it kind of scary, right? And what have you. But no, it's amazing. We get direction and assistance from spirits that have gone before us. We can communicate with those that can help us. Or it can hurt us in that sense if we gravitate in the wrong direction. Right? We can get bad information at times. And then finally, Spiritism, when you take it in its entirety, offers material facts. There's a big book of knowledge that hasn't changed in a couple hundred years, right? From when it was written. And it has been around, the facts have been around since the beginning of time, right? They didn't create it, they didn't invent it, it simply got put down on paper. And there's nothing that can prove that it's not true. Right? That we can't talk to spirit, that we can't talk to spirits, right? It's not a physical science that you can necessarily measure, but more and more research is being done, linking and proving that this phenomenon exists, right? Whole segments of universities, right? Departments within behavioral sciences or different sections, right? On near-death experiences, on spirituality. More and more doctors are practicing, right? More than just medicine now, they're incorporating spirituality. There's a conference coming up, is it October? The first or second weekend of October in Miami. It's the 11th or 12th annual Spiritist Medical Conference, which I'm going to go to this one because it's so close. But this is going to be 2 days of nothing but presentations and lectures from medical professionals that take a spiritist, not a spiritist perspective, but they incorporate these concepts, not necessarily spiritists, but they incorporate these concepts into the way they practice, and they have data and what have you for it. So simply, I'll wrap up here that natural laws, God's laws, you can't fight with them, right? And the more we try to fight the reality, the more we suffer and the harder it gets. So if you're here on a Thursday night and this stuff makes sense, I would encourage you to spend more time studying some of those books we looked at, maybe picking up some new ones, and just lifting your energy as much as possible on a daily basis to be more positive and attract more positive spirits into your life to help direct you and reduce your suffering. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time.